Well, hello, Vikings. My name is Steve Salerno. I'm your superintendent of schools, and we'd like to take a few minutes here today to discuss ESSER 2 and ESSER 3 funding. These are dollars that have been afforded to us by the federal government in order to keep school districts safe and open, close gaps in achievement. And I've invited my friends here from the senior leadership team to join us in today's conversation. We'll have Brian Johnson, who will lead us off in a moment. Brian, as you know, is our Director of Student Services. Scott DeYoung, who is our Associate Superintendent of Business and Finance. Director of Instruction, Sarah Straka, is here with us. And then rounding out our team is Sarah Eartham. Sarah is our Coordinator of Human Resources. Brian, could you please take it away for us?
Yeah, you bet. So I'm going to be just talking about why we're reaching out with these three components of the ESSER funding. As you know, there's ESSER 1, ESSER 2, and ESSER 3. ESSER 1 was passed back in March of 2020. Those funds have been spent as a district, and those were really kind of focused on the overall funds for protection. So MER filters, sanitation, other components. But then there's the ESSER 2 and the ESSER 3 funds. As neither one of those funds have been spent, and we're in the process of reaching out to you to let you know what the purpose of those funds are and how we're intending to spend those. It's really important to note that these are one-time funds. So these aren't ongoing funds. We'll continue to talk about that as the presentation goes on, but they're really both components. And so what we're here to do to talk about is think about the needs of the local students and families who are disproportionately affected by the pandemic, looking at some of the data on learning and in behaviors within our classrooms, within our schools that have happened as a result of the pandemic and school closures and all the components that come with the pandemic. Review proposed district priorities that really directly affect the learning loss and social emotional needs and other needs of special components of students and of our families. And then we want to hear from you. What are some of your ideas? What do you support our plan? And then how can you help us set the priorities on using the funds going forward? And so now Scott's going to take it away and kind of talk about the money pieces.
Thanks, Brian. So Mount Horeb Schools is expected to receive just under $1.1 million. As you can see, ESSER 2 funds will amount to just over $477,000. ESSER 3 funding will amount to just over $616,000. Each one of these grant programs have a deadline. The ESSER 2 grant deadline to use the funds is September 30th, 2023. And the ESSER 3 funds has a deadline of September 30th, 2024. It's important to note that the funds are intended to help safely reopen and sustain the safe operation of schools and address the impact of the coronavirus pandemic on the nation's students. So what can this money be used for? You'll see a list of 5 bullets here. These are examples of what we can use the funds for. The first one is preparedness and response. This has to do with things like PPE and hand sanitizer, addressing long-term school closure. The second one, an example would be providing additional staff to support virtual instruction, as well as helping to provide and deliver school meals. The next bullet is outreach and services for special populations. And these would be things such as professional development for staff to serve English learners in a remote setting. The fourth one is mental health services and supports. This would be providing additional support to mental health staff, folks such as school counselors, psychologists, and social workers. And then the last one you'll see on the list is education technology, and that's things like providing devices and software for remote instruction and even improving cybersecurity in the district. So what is this money for? It has one requirement, and it says that LEA's school districts must use a minimum of 20% of ESSER 3 funds to implement evidence-based interventions to address learning loss. And on the screen, you'll see a few examples of this. things such as summer learning or summer enrichment, instruction improvement and professional development, providing reading specialists and interventionists, as well as social, emotional, behavioral interventions. It's also important to note that a school district must ensure that interventions respond to students' social, emotional, and academic needs, and that they address the disproportionate impact of COVID-19 on underrepresented student populations and subgroups. As Brian Johnson noted just a moment ago, these are one-time use of funds. These grants are provided to us for the things that we just suggested. Because they are one-time funds, school districts have to be very cautious that they don't invest these funds in recurring costs. Doing so would cause us to hit a funding cliff once these funds are used over the next 2 years. So what Mount Horeb Schools will do is we will not be investing these funds in personnel costs such as wages and benefits, and we will not be able to use these funds to help balance our budget.
So one of the things that Scott just talked about was really looking and narrowing down who's been mostly impacted by the pandemic, the loss of learning, all of those outcomes. And so when we go through the data and really specifically look at the data, we need to look at specific subgroups who could have potentially been impacted. So that's our racial and ethnic groups, students who are on free and reduced lunch, students with disabilities, English learners, looking at gender, migrant students, students who are homeless, and then students who are in foster care. And so as a district, really looking at all of those groups, seeing if there's populations who have been impacted and how we can help support the different needs that are met as well. And so I think Sarah's going to go through academic needs and where we're at.
Yeah, thanks, Brian. So the first part of our data review is going to look at the academic focus and needs and what we're seeing as a school district. On this slide, we're looking at English language arts on something called the Forward exam. The Forward exam is where students in grades 3 through 8 can take reading or math. It's a state assessment. And the data we have here is for the collective group of 3rd through 8th graders. And we can see how our students have performed on the English language arts portion over a period of time. And then we can see how things have occurred at the state level as well. We can see that due to COVID, we didn't have testing in the 1920 school year, but we did have testing in the 2021 school year. And we did see a dip in our overall performance, our proficiency. Students identify as proficient or advanced. We also see that dip at the state level as well. So we know that we want to look back at our core curriculum, our universal core, and think about how we can continue to support staff this year and in future years with our core curriculum. When we start to divide out by categories or groups of students, some of the groupings of students that Brian alluded to a few slides earlier, we start to see some gaps within those student groups. And we can see how COVID affected those gaps as well. So for example, in this slide, we have those students who are considered English proficient compared to those students who are English language learners at our school district. And English proficiency, those that are proficient in English is the blue line, and then our EL students is the green. And based on last year's testing, none of our EL students were considered advanced or proficient in English language arts. Where at the state level, we do see still some proficiency there for that category of students. We dive a little further into students with or without, with being labeled with or without a disability. We can see the trend lines here for students without disabilities and students with disabilities. We did see actually a slight uptick in the amount of students or the percent of students advanced or proficient. But again, we still see the gaps that are here. We look by race and ethnicity. We break down the data that way. We can see the categories of students that are listed here. And we do see, again, a gap for students who identify as Black. But we do see an uptick, which is interesting as well. So we'll be keeping a note on that as we move forward into this year and future years. So that's our overall data. But when we start to then look at grade level data, So here is a slide that talks about PALS. PALS is a phonological screener for our early elementary students. We have data here for our kindergarten, first and second grade students, and this is their summary benchmark data, meaning by the end of the year on various components of the PALS assessment, it's a collective benchmark score. And we can see over time, we have 4 years here, how our students have fared through normal times and through our pandemic. And our second graders at the fall, we can see only 59% came into second grade having that benchmark score being met coming in, where that hasn't happened in the past. And we can see over time between kindergarten, our current first grader, and our current second graders, that learning loss has really been felt by our second graders, because when the pandemic started, they were in kindergarten. So those foundational skills we're really watching and how we can help progress them with that. But when we look at our older students and how they fared during this time, we have some longitudinal data here from our 5th grade students in something called A reading, which is part of FastBridge. And we can see over time, depending on the percentile listed here in colors, just visually, we can see that because our 5th graders were older, they had those foundational skills met. They fared pretty well compared to the younger grade level students during the pandemic. We can see this in math as well. And then we also looked at our 6th grade students just as a snapshot example for you all. Our current 6th graders over time, we can see have rebounded nicely from the pandemic back to levels where we've seen academic performance before in reading and in math. But when we look at special services, this is where Brian's going to talk a little bit more about how we are looking to maybe increase some areas.
Yeah, I think this fits right along to what Sarah was talking about with reading development. When you start thinking of reading and the process of language development and sound production, our speech and language therapists and needs throughout the district are really great. We're looking at our speech and language pathologist with really high caseloads and currently 21 referrals. When I think back to, appropriate language development, to me, that's modeling, it's hearing peers speak, all of those components that go along with it. And due to a pandemic, right, we were in isolation a lot more than typically, and so were our littlest kids, and that has an impact on language development, and speaking correctly and using the right sounds. And so I really feel like there's a lot of work that needs to be done around preventative work, and additional mitigation measures to really look at the speech and language development needs, sound production. When you think about these littlest learners who were, working on word productions, 2, 3, 4 years old now, right? We've been wearing the masks the majority of the time, and so looking at lips and modeling is a lot more difficult. And so I do think that we have to look back on those preventative measures, look at where we're at for speech and language needs, and really support that development at a younger level.
Part of looking at, we looked at academic data, but we're also going to look on behavioral needs as well and share what we're seeing as a systems level. So looking at our office discipline referrals over a 4-year period, we did remove the 2021 school year. Students were virtual, we were in hybrid. It was just an anomaly within our data. But there was some wonders how our students are faring this school year, the 21-22 school year with behavior, because they're coming back into new routines, new structures, sometimes even new buildings. And we can see over time, we do have some anomalies some years, but when we look just at these green bar graphs, which signify this school year, the larger major discipline office referrals aren't much higher. We are a little higher at the high school, and the high school staff may realize this because many of these violations are dress code or mask violations, as they're working with students day in and day out to make sure those masks are pulled up. But there's something in what the numbers are not saying. It sometimes can feel sort of like this picture here. All these sort of minor little things occurring within the classroom, maturity levels, persistence levels, discipline levels. And we have some quotes from our principals that really reflect what maybe the building is feeling right now. So for example, at the Intermediate Center, Katie Hauge had the observation that many of our students, their needs haven't been met because of COVID, because of the pandemic, because of the shutdown. There's more trauma, there's more mental health needs. The middle school principal, Paul Christensen, just said there's these small, regular, consistent redirects that staff are continuously reminding students of, and those have increased. So all of our student services teams, deans of students, assistant principals, student service members are really working hard to make sure needs are met, and meeting the difficult circumstances that our families are facing right now. But that being said, on the flip side, we also want to look at the number of students who are making the right choices. So that would be the percent of students with 0 office discipline referrals. And we can see over time, it's pretty consistent. The majority of our kids are making the right choices at the right time.
And the district's always had the social and emotional needs of our students at the forefront of their mind. And how have we supported this? Over the past several years, the district has been reallocating and dedicating district funds. We've also been applying for state and county grants to support the student social and emotional health needs and our staff. For example, on the personnel side, we have added in the dean of students at our elementary levels to help support with student behaviors. And we've incorporated building bridges to provide additional support as well. Our student services staff are having their team meetings in the building so that they're more visible and building those relationships. Last year, we implemented the mental health screener, SABERS, and we're also continuing that so important relationship with Oregon Mental Health. They've been a really great partner for the district, and we continue to see those referrals increase, and just appreciate your help in that as well. And this picture on the slide might be something that is something that you recognize as well. This is just another great partnership that we've had with our high school art program and teachers and the Dane County art program, where we've been able to have this mural within our community that really addresses the mental health needs and has a lot of symbolism into it.
So based then on the data that's been presented to you here today, as well as the parameters that we are allowed to spend ESSER 2 and ESSER 3 funds on, we are proposing the following universal supports in terms of those additional positions: an instructional coach that could support the academic side of the house, continued professional development. We've had a wonderful experience over the course of the past 5 years related to PLC, professional learning community attendance at some big events. And because of COVID, we've had to hit the pause button. But those of you who've attended that have said to us that this is really important to you and that you encourage your colleagues to continue to participate. And we believe allocating dollars to support that is key. Class size reduction continues to be an important piece for us, as I know it is for you who are doing the heavy lifting on the front lines, particularly because we've seen some behaviors that have been questionable or concerning, as well as gaps in students' achievement. We want to marshal support to get that additional lower teacher-pupil ratio for us. And then reading and literacy continue to be an important part. We know it's foundational to everything we do in our learning and teaching. And we want to continue to offer professional development, research-based professional development, evidence-based professional development around these topics. Now, more targeted, as Brian had spoken of, the importance of speech and language, and looking to increase our FTE there by approximately 50% FTE to take a half-time position and hopefully take down some of those numbers we're beginning to see in referrals. And an additional elementary interventionist, a coach that might be able to help us with the mathematics side of the house as well. Increasing our school support through our school psychologists' time. This is most pronounced at the middle school level. And lastly, we know that the needs of our students, the demographics of our students are continuing to evolve. And how can we honor those beautiful students by making certain that we have additional English language learner support, whether that be through a teacher or a paraprofessional time. We are eager to study that. So where do we go from here? Next steps, we need to hear from you. It's really important for us to make certain that whatever we do, we get the input of those people who this will be impacting, our students, our staff, and our parents. And so we're attempting to do that through this video forum here today. And attached to this email that had this link to this video will also be a survey. And we're asking you to please take time to complete that before the end of the workday here today, the 17th. And we'll get that link to you here in a moment. But then also know that we feel compelled to also get the feedback of our parents. And on January the 26th at 6:30 p.m., we will be hosting a similar forum as we're doing here right now to garner the input of our parents. This much is true, is that our successes are ours together, and I know that our best days as a school district lie ahead. I'm so grateful to be a Viking, and I hope you are too. Have a good rest of your day, please.